Hello and welcome back. So now in this video we are going to start with our bias controller methods. Okay, so in the source I'll create a folder called controllers. Okay, and then inside I'll create one folder for now, or let me just create the buyer folder and then I'll create the seller folder. Now in the buyer I'll create just one file. I'll call this get.ts. Okay, now this is the file where we'll add all the necessary methods. Okay, so the first one is going to be const email async. Okay, to get buyer by email, I'm using arrow function, so requests of type requests. Okay, and then response of type response. Okay, promise of type void. Okay, right here. And so to get the buyer, so const buyer of type I buyer document or null equal to await gets buyer by email. And then we are going to get it from request dot current user dot email. Okay, request the current user dot email. Now we need to send this res dot status. It will be status code dot ok dot json, and then we pass the message. I'll say message, I'll just call this buyer profile, and then we send the buyer. Okay, so this is the first method. We send get buyer by email. I'll duplicate this, get buyer by current username. Okay, so here it's going to be request.current_user.username, and then we still send buyer profile and then also the buyer. And then the third one is the username, just get by username. Okay, now this one is going to come from request.params. Okay, so the username will come from params. Let me change the function. Yep, I need to change the function. So these two will be get user by username. Okay, so these two methods will be get user by username, but for this first current user we are getting the username from request.current_user, while for the username we are getting it from request.params. Okay, so now let's go ahead and export. Okay, and I will export the email function, the username function, and the current user function. Okay, so this is what we have inside our buyer controller. Let's create our buyer routes. Okay, in the source create a routes folder and then create a file called buyer.ts. Okay, this is going to be very easy. And here const router of type router equal to express.router. Okay, and then let's import express. Let me fix this quotes problem, and then const buyer routes. Okay, it returns router, and then router.get. The first one is going to be /email. Oh, it's going to be /email. Okay, and the method is going to be email. Okay, I'll duplicate it twice. Okay, and then return router. Okay, and then the second one is username, and the method is current username. And the third one is just username. Okay, but this time we're going to pass in the params. Okay, now let's export the buyer routes. Now that we have this, we can go ahead and add it to our routes file. Remember, we added a placeholder for this, so I will remove that placeholder and then instead add the buyer routes. Okay, so here I will just paste this and then I can import the route. So add users. Okay, so we now have our buyer routes. What I want to do is let's add the health route. Okay, so we can go ahead and add the health route. Okay, so let's add the health route. So in the controllers folder, I'll just create health.ts. Let me copy one that I already created before, so we have the same content. So I'll copy this and then go right here, and I'll change this to user service is healthy and okay. Okay, so for this let me change it to an arrow function, because that's what we are using. Okay, and then I can export this, export the health method. Okay, now we have that. Let's go to routes. Okay, I'll create health.ts and it's going to be similar to what I already have. So I just need only one. I don't need this. The method is health. Okay, import this. Now the path is going to be user-health, and I'll change this to health. Okay, now I can go ahead and use this in the main routes file, and then I'll change this here to routes and then have it imported. Okay, so at this point we now have the buyer routes and controllers and also the seller routes and controllers. Let's add them to the API gateway. Okay, so let's add the routes to the API gateway. So I will start with the controller. So I'll create a folder called user or users. Okay, and then inside another folder called buyer, and also a folder called seller. Okay, for the buyer, I will create a get method, so get.ts. Okay, now this get, I will export a class called get. Okay, now we can add the different public methods. Let me copy one of the methods we've added before, so to just save us a lot of time. Okay, so here I'll paste it. I don't need this. Now let's import what we need. We need, let me get from Axios. Now we don't need this. Instead, we need the buyer service dot get buyer by email. Okay, let me fix these issues. And we are not using this. I can import the status codes. Okay, now let me also import request and response from Express. Okay, so the method, I'll call this email. Let me duplicate it. I'll call this current username, and this will be, now instead of user here, it will be buyer. This will be buyer, and then the method will be get current user by username. Then the third method is going to be just username, and then we are going to call get buyer by username, and then we pass request.params.username. Okay, yeah, we need the request. Okay, so request.params.username. Now we can add this to, or we can create a route. So create buyer.ts. Okay, just create a simple route. Okay, a buyer route, and here I'll call this buyer. Okay, and it's going to be buyer/email, buyer/username, and then buyer:username. Now I'll call this get. Okay, I'll call this get method. So we have to import it from the correct place. Okay, so get, and this is going to be email, this is going to be current username, and this is going to be username. Okay, now one last thing we need to do is to use this in the route, in the main routes folder. Okay, so we are exporting buyer route, so go to your main routes folder, and then here you'll need to verify. So I'll duplicate this and then import the routes. Okay, so with this now we have our routes for buyers both in the API gateway and the user service.